All right, we are now recording. I would like to welcome all of our attendees to this latest Office of Neighborhood Coordination Lunch and Learn. My name is Vanessa Baca. I am the ONC manager. I work with the City Neighborhood Associations here in Albuquerque, and I'm very, very pleased to host this parliamentarian training with a very well-known attorney, Randall Van Vleck. Randall has worked with the City Council for quite a long time now. I'm very pleased to have him here. What I'm going to do, normally what we do with these trainings, Randall, and to our attendees is I have everybody type in their questions in the chat and we address them at the end. I think what we're going to do this time is we're still offer that option, but I would like to offer our participants the opportunity to be part of the training as a panelist if they would like to. And so if that's the case, I invite everybody just to type that into the chat. And once Mr. Van Vleck is done with his presentation, I will either ask your question or I'll let you into the chat and you can ask him personally, just because I know parliamentarian process sometimes can be a big topic for people. So Randall, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much again.
Great. Thank you very much, Vanessa. I'm very pleased to be here. And without further ado, let's get going. I don't know how many of you are. I can't see anyone here, so I don't know how many are there or how many people we have in the room that are chair people of your various organizations. But I can tell you, that if you've ever tried to run a meeting and keep people on track and on topic, it really is a lot like herding cats. So it's truly a metaphor that kind of strikes home. So we're going to talk about this thing we call parliamentary procedure, and we're going to talk about basic understanding of what we mean or what I mean by parliamentary procedure. I mean, it's a special, organized way of conducting meetings. So we're gonna learn a little bit about the basics of parliamentary procedure. And probably the most important thing we're going to do today is we're going to run through the process, the approved process, I'll call it, for making and processing motions in a deliberative body such as yours. Now, one thing we have to bear in mind, a lot of these things are also governed by some state statutes and city ordinances. So, for example, the Open Meetings Act might contradict some of the things that are in or what you might find as standard procedure in Robert's Rules of Order. So we need to understand that if there's a state law or a city ordinance on the issue, that would trump the Robert's Rules of Order. And Robert's Rules of Order is simply a guide, simply a guide to assist you in being as a chairperson, I suppose, being a good referee. So we're going to talk about what the basics of parliamentary procedure are. We're going to talk about making and processing motions. So we're going to have a quick pop quiz. Okay, just kind of write these answers down to yourself or put them into your mind yourself, and let's see how we do. First question: all motions, and these are true or false questions. So all motions require a second. Think about that for a second. Write your answer down in your mind or on a piece of paper if you wish. Second question: a member must be recognized by the presiding officer to offer a motion. Third question is kind of the corollary to the second, and that is a member who speaks without recognition by the presiding officer may be ruled out of order. 4, true or false, only one item of business may be discussed at a time. And finally, any member can call the question without a vote by the board. So you got those all in your mind? Okay, well let's see how we did. First question, all motions require a second. False. There are some motions that do not require a second. And there are some circumstances, like, for example, a motion or a statement usually comes out as a statement, but it really is a motion to call the question, to end debate immediately. That's a motion, really. And it doesn't require a second. So that's an example there. Or a point of order, which is a motion for the chairman to fix something that's going wrong. It's a motion, essentially. Comes out as a demand often. Does not require a second. So those are two examples where it doesn't require a second. Number two, must you be recognized by the presiding officer to offer a motion? Absolutely. This is the power of the chair. And as we'll see, the chair is the person who assigns the floor, the individual, and you are out of order. Question number three, true, you are out of order if you try to speak without getting permission from the chair, unless you are offering a very particular type of privileged motion, which we talked about.
Randall, I don't mean to interrupt. I apologize. We had an attendee ask if you could put your PowerPoint into presentation mode. I think they're having a little trouble seeing it on the screen.
I can try. Let's see if does that work for you?
I think that should do it. That's better. Looks
Okay,
better
so
to me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No worries. Okay, let me go back to where we were. Okay. Only one item of business may be discussed at a time. We'll talk as time goes on about what that means. And then the final question, this is always a tough one. This is what hangs people up a lot. Is it possible for a member to call the question? In other words, to order a vote without a vote of the board? And the answer to that is false. No one member can force a vote or force debate to be closed. It requires a vote of the body. So look at that. You all got an A+. Perfect. Okay, let's look at this in detail. Why are we doing this? Why do we want to have parliamentary procedure? Why do we think it's a good deal? I offer three reasons I think why parliamentary procedure is important and essential. And the first is it ensures that the majority prevails. I mean, there are safeguards built into parliamentary procedure that basically preserve this notion that the majority rules. Now, while at the same time, it protects the rights of the minority to participate. So we're not going to allow situations where the majority can steamroll things through without at least some input from the minority. Nor are we going to let the minority, hijack the proceedings. And so it's a protection for both the will of the majority and the rights of the minority. And we do all that, and the end result ultimately is if we follow these rules and everybody abides by these rules, we expedite business. We get the most amount of business done in the shortest amount of time. And that really is the ultimate goal of having a parliamentary procedure in place. So what is it? What are you talking about? We're talking about some complicated rules. I mean, if you've adopted Robert's Rules of Order and you've ever read it, you'll probably agree with me that it's a very good cure for insomnia. There's a lot of stuff in there. A lot of stuff applies to you. A lot of stuff doesn't apply. But what it does do is it provides a roadmap for your meetings. It provides essentially the rules of the road for conducting, public meetings or meetings of a deliberative notion. It's also a system for conducting business in a group. When you get a group together, it is sometimes difficult to focus on the matter at hand. There are passions, there are personalities, there are personality clashes. There are strong personalities. There are strong issues. There are strong political and personal issues all at work. And we need a system to focus the board and the board's membership on taking care of that business. I've been to a couple homeowners association meetings, and I've actually acted as a parliamentarian once or twice. And I can tell you, these are some of the most divisive and argumentative type meetings that I've ever been to in some cases. And so the reason we have these types of rules, the reason we have these procedures is to give everybody a roadmap as to what is expected conduct. We want to have rules governing the behavior of the membership so that the meeting process is not disrupted. And to go back to that previous slide, where the will of the majority is ensured, but the rights of the minority are preserved. So it's a delicate balance sometimes, depending upon the issue and depending upon the membership. And the chair truly has to be a master at balancing those various interests in order to get a meeting and have a meeting run smoothly. So what it's not, what parliamentary procedure is not, and this sometimes is hard to swallow like this, but it's not about getting your way all the time. It's not about using parliamentary procedure always to your advantage. It's certainly not about disrupting the conduct of business, or interrupting. I mean, I've been to meetings where every other word somebody was interrupting the proceedings, with some trivial parliamentary faux pas, and that's not what it's about. It's not about necessarily strict adherence. It's not necessarily about being able to follow this book chapter and verse. It's got to be flexible, and it's got to be molded to meet your needs. I think that's probably the most important thing about parliamentary procedure. It's got to be usable. It's got to be user-friendly. The people who are living under it need to know what the rules are, and the people who are enforcing it need to know what those rules are. So they can't be too esoteric or too technical. They have to be rules that everybody knows and understands and agrees to live by. It's not intended to stall participation or prevent participation. If we have, particularly in the public sector, we have a responsibility to have public input and to permit public input. And so parliamentary procedure is a tool to allow that to happen in a regulated manner. It's certainly not a stall tactic, and most importantly, it's not a weapon. It should not be weaponized to the point where you're using it as a sword to thwart discussion and debate on something that may be distasteful. So we shouldn't weaponize this. We should use it as is intended to have orderly, informative, participatory meetings. That's what this is really all about. So let's talk about how, and I think how governing bodies, but I think it's equally applicable to boards like yours. And this is an outline of how governing bodies or boards, deliberative bodies, I should say, take action. And it's an 8-step process to go from idea to decision, in a public meeting. And we're going to talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. But the first is that the member obtains the floor. We said it in our pop quiz. You first have to obtain the floor in order to speak or to make a motion. So that's the first step in taking action. Once that member obtains the floor, the second step is to actually make a motion, put forth an idea or a proposal for the board to debate and consider. That motion is normally in the form of what I will call a main motion, meaning it's a main idea. It's bringing an idea to the board for action. That type of motion requires a second. So, cannot proceed, or should not proceed, I should say, without a second. There are circumstances where you can move forward without a second. We'll talk about those in a second. So that's the third step. That once a motion is made, it is seconded. And that's one of the few exceptions where you can speak or respond without having to first obtain the floor. So the maker of the motion has to obtain the floor, but the person seconding the motion just needs to holler out, I second the motion, or second. So it's one of those exceptions to the having to obtain the floor rule. That's the thing about Roberts. There's so many exceptions. So I'm just going to give you a few that you need to remember, and this is the first. The fourth step in this is that the chair states the motion. And the chair, what that means is the chair will restate the motion as it was made. The fifth step is probably the most important step, and that's the debate. That's where we're going to kick the motion around. We're going to decide, how the motion should be dealt with. This is a time where amendments might be made. This is a time where other types of actions to that motion might be made. And so all of that is going to be dealt with in this section that I call the debate section. After the debate is starting to wind down, and it's pretty clear that there's no more debate that's needed, the chair will put the question. What that means basically is the chair will put that question back to the board for a vote. The seventh step is to actually vote on the motion. In public bodies, such as yours, those votes have to be done in public and need to be done and recorded in the minutes. And then after that vote, the final step is for the clerk or the chair, whichever, to announce the results of the vote. So it's an 8-step process. Taking the floor, making a motion, seconding the motion, stating the motion, debating the motion, putting the question, voting on the motion, and announcing the result. And I know I'm going pretty quickly here. We can make this slideshow available for everybody as well at the end of the day. We'll send it to Vanessa. She can distribute it if anybody is interested in getting it later. So let's look at these things in a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk. This is the piece I talk about. We're talking about processing motions. So, first step in processing motion is to obtain the floor. It's a very important job the chair has. The chair controls access to the floor. This is where the chair has to be fair and impartial. The chair can't just give access to the floor to the chair's buddies or to people that are in favor of motions or questions that the chair is in favor of. This is where the chair has to protect the rights of the minority by allowing the minority access to the floor as well. And sometimes it's a delicate balancing act to make sure that the rights of the minority don't get trampled by the overwhelming presence of the majority. So chairs walk a tightrope when it comes to making sure that they allocate the floor in a fair manner. And like we said in the pop quiz, it is out of order to speak unless you have the floor. Now, the flip side to that, incidentally, is once you have the floor, you should not be interrupted. And you can speak for as long as you want, or as long as your rules provided that you are speaking on topic. You can't stand up like they do in Congress sometimes and read a book, or just talk about nonsense. One of the things that the speaker can monitor is that debate and discussions are germane to the question. They're relevant to the question. So first, kind of bedrock principle here is that it's out of order to speak unless you have the floor. But the second is an equally important one, is that a speaker has the floor until they exhaust their time, until they are called to order by the chair. Let's say they may be called to order because they're speaking off topic. They may be called to order because they've exceeded their time limitation. They may be called to order because they're being inflammatory, or they're being aggressive, or they're being they're using profanity. Their speech is volatile, their speech is provocative. Those types of things are things that a point of order can bring to the attention of the board. So really, these are only a couple of times where a speaker can be interrupted, and that is for another person, another member, to raise a point of order. The rules of decorum are not being followed. Time is expired. The speaker is off topic. Those types of things can be in a point of order. And certain other privileged motions that are kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but they might include points of personal privilege. It's too hot or too cold in the room. It's too noisy in the room. Environmental things of that nature. Parliamentary inquiries, perhaps. Don't understand the process and won't understand where we are in the process of where we're going. So those types of very limited motions are available to interrupt the speaker, but very few motions can interrupt the speaker. One handy thing about Robert, I don't know if you have copies of Robert's rule with you or not, but in the very back, there's this tinted section. You kind of see it. I hold my book up here. There's a tinted section. So those tinted pages give you a listing of a variety of motions and what their characteristics are, their standard characteristics. And one of the categories in there is, can a speaker be interrupted? And so it's a handy guide if you want to look up a common motion and see whether or not the speaker can be interrupted. That's a good, handy way to utilize Robert's rules in a pinch. So you got to obtain the floor before anything happens. Okay, so that's the very first step. The second step is then for the person who has obtained the floor to make a motion. Now, a motion is the vehicle that's used to bring business before the assembly. It's the transition from the agenda item, which we have to post, to the action item that the body's going to act on. So it's a vehicle to make that transformation from agenda to action item. Okay. This main motion, this idea that you have that you want the body to vote on, can only be made when no other motion is pending. If there are other motions pending, they must be disposed of before this main motion, this main idea, can be made by another speaker. So it's out of order to make a main motion when some other motion is pending. So those motions got to be disposed of. Then we can make a main motion. And it's important because this is what's going to be the officially recorded statement of the body in the minutes. So it's important for whoever's making the motion to be very clear, very precise, very specific as to what they want, what they're asking the body to do. And it normally begins simply with, I move. I move that. I move that we buy a tractor. I move that we spend money for this particular purpose. I move that we adopt this or that. As you noticed, all of my motions were made in the affirmative. And I'll talk about that, but just briefly. The reason I'm suggesting that motions be made in the affirmative is it becomes easier to determine what the vote means. Let me give you an example. I move we buy a tractor for the homeowners association. Okay, when it comes down to it, we just simple as that. So a yes vote on that motion means yes, let's buy a tractor. A no vote means no, let's don't buy a tractor. What if we state that negatively? I move we don't buy a tractor because we don't have enough money, something like that. Then a yes vote means no, and a no vote means yes. So it's confusing. So sometimes it's hard when there's a motion or an issue that you're not comfortable with making an affirmative motion. But I think for our purposes, if you can focus on making positive affirmative motions that you either vote yes or no on, makes much more sense. And it's easier for your minutes taker to write down exactly what the board decided on that particular question. We talked about only one main motion being considered at a time, and that's because we don't want to confuse ourselves. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to confuse our minute takers and our public. So once a main motion is before the body, it's got to be dealt with. It's got to be adopted. It's got to be rejected. It's got to be disposed of in some other manner before we move on to the main motion. So, for example, we had to another main motion. So we got a main motion to buy a tractor for the homeowners association. We can't discuss buying golf carts for our enforcement people until we dispose of the first motion dealing with buying a tractor. Those are two separate main motions. And we need to deal with one before we deal with the other. Now, the last bullet just talks about we have a variety of what we call subsidiary motions that we use to deal with the main motion. So we have to adopt it, reject it, dispose of it, or some other way. That's what subsidiary motions do. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of those common subsidiary motions and what they do to a main motion. This is my statement on that. The concise, unambiguous, complete, clear form of a main motion. It makes it so much easier for the chair to keep people on topic, for members of the public to know precisely what it is that the board is talking about, for the members at the end of the day to cast their vote, and for the minute taker, the clerk, to know what to put in the minutes as to how the board treated the motion. So that unambiguous, clear, concise, affirmative wording is so important. What I want you to try to avoid at all costs, if you can, it's kind of my pet peeve when it comes to parliamentary stuff, and that is the dreaded ISO move. You know, I've heard so many boards with so many people. You know, sometimes they'll have a debate about something and then they'll ISO move. Well, my question is always, you so move what? You know, we need to know what you're moving. We need to know what you want done. Now, normally, and this is where some people get tripped up, and I know with government, we need to treat government a little differently. You saw that order of eight ways to dispose of the motion. You saw that debate was pretty far down the line. Let me see if I go back to that slide. Okay, here it is. We saw that we obtained the floor, we made the motion, we seconded the motion, we stated the motion, we've done all of those things before we even started talking about debate, which is number 5. Okay. Now, a lot of times what happens is that there's an agenda item and the chair introduces the agenda item, and then people start debating and they start talking about it before a motion is made. And that's what gets people confused a lot, because sometimes there's this debate and there's this discussion because the board doesn't know what they want to do. The board doesn't necessarily know what they want to move on or what they want to make a motion on. And so sometimes they put the debate before the motion. And that's where this dreaded I so move comes in. I represented a board one time, and they went through an hour and a half's worth of debate on a variety of stuff. And then out came the dreaded I so move. And it was late, and people wanted to go home. So somebody seconded the I so move before I could open my mouth to say, whoa, hang on. And they voted on it, and they went home. And the next day, people said, well, what did we vote on? We didn't know what we voted on. So that's why it's important, I think, to follow the rules, follow my process, get the motion before the debate, because that way you know what you're talking about. So the second, we talked about, well, avoid these temptations by something. Well, that's the motion. That's putting the main motion up there. Seconding the motion. A second is only, it only implies that another member agrees that the motion is worthy of debate. That's all it is. Doesn't mean you agree with the motion. Doesn't mean you support the motion. Doesn't mean you're going to vote in favor of the motion. It simply means, yeah, I agree with the maker of the motion that we should talk. That's all it is. Okay, so in my mind, I think it's just a technical violation, and it's just people resting on technicalities when they refuse to second the motion. I mean, that to me is one way that the majority sometimes ramrods their stuff through, while squashing the rights of the minority. Because if it's a one lone wolf there who makes the motion that never gets seconded, then that person's voice is lost, and that's unfortunate. So I personally don't like the idea of boards killing motions for lack of a second. I think the maker of the motion at least deserves the courtesy of a second, so that you can debate this motion, and so the board can send a clear message about what they think of the motion. Clear message being, we're going to support it. Clear message being, we don't want any part of it. But letting it drop to the floor for lack of a second, I think is kind of I guess the way I would describe it is it's a cowardly way of killing motions. I think the board should stand up and make a decision on it. So that's what a second is. But this is kind of that another one of those exceptions we talked about. If for some reason, the presiding officer either fails to ask for a second, or if debate has already begun, or if a vote has already begun, then the need for a second has become immaterial. Because if debate has already begun, it's obvious at that point in time that more than one person wants to talk about it, which is the purpose of the second. Same with voting. If you start voting on it, it's clear that more than one person wanted to take this matter up. The reason and need for the second becomes immaterial. Okay, so now we've got obtaining the floor. You've made your motion. You've seconded the motion. The fourth part is that the chair states the motion. And after a motion's been moved and seconded, the presiding officer states the question. In other words, the presiding officer restates the motion exactly as it was made by the maker. So up until this time, the motion belongs to the maker. And if the maker wants to refine the motion, change the motion, withdraw the motion, it's okay. They can do that on their own. But once the chair states the question as it was made by the maker, it belongs to the body, and then only the body can dispose of that motion. So, this stating of the question has two reasons. One, it effectuates this transfer of authority from the maker to the body. But secondly, it's to ensure that what you're going to debate, which is the next step, is what the maker of the motion intended. So this is the time where if the chair states it and gets it wrong, or makes a mistake in restating the motion, or doesn't restate the motion exactly as the maker made it, this is the opportunity for the maker to correct the chair so that the ensuing debate is on the motion that was offered by the maker and that was seconded by the second. That makes sense? I know you can't talk to me, but yeah, I hope so. So we've got the floor, we've made the motion, we've seconded the motion, we've stated the question. Now is the time for debate and discussion. This is the time for the members to debate the motion. And I would always start with members debating the motion. They can debate the motions. They can make additional motions that dispose of the question. I mean, this is the time to make motions that would dispose of the question, such as a motion to postpone. That would dispose of the question, right? Would take it out of your hands and put it and postpone it to another day. If you made a motion to refer it to a committee, that would take it out of the board's hands and put it in someone else's. So that would be a way of disposing of the motion, albeit temporarily. So this is the time where members can make motions that relate to the main motion and its treatment of the main motion. Now, it's traditional, it's not required, but normally the maker of the motion gets the first opportunity to debate the question. And then so that individual will be assigned the floor and can debate until their time limits are up or until they exhaust themselves or whatever until they're called to order. And then the next person gets to debate. The next person will get the floor and will have the opportunity to debate the motion or to make additional motion. And I don't know what your rules are about public participation, but it seems to me that after the board has an opportunity to debate, then public input, public participation might be in order. But the word is, we call it debate, but it's really, I want to caution you about looking at it in terms of debate. It's not a back and forth. It's not a time where the board can ask questions of one another, and the board can ask questions of the audience, and the audience can ask questions of the board. It's really a time for speech. It's really a time for board members to either support or reject the proposition. It's the same speech time for members of the public to either support the motion or not. It's really not a debate as you would normally think of that term. But we are gonna discuss this main motion, and the purpose of the discussion is for the board to decide what we want to do about it. How do we want to dispose of this particular issue or question, motion that's been brought to our attention? So the rules of debate are the same as the rules of anywhere else. The chair must recognize a member before that person is allowed to debate or give their statement or speech on the particular issue. So just like in email, you have to obtain permission of the chair, and you have to debate the motion, and you have to be on topic. Yeah. Traditionally, now the debate should be addressed to the presiding officer, not to individual members of the board or to members of the public. I know your boards are a lot more informal, and so, you can deal with informality, you can allow informality. I recommend informality with this caveat: the more informal stricture, if you will. You have to have some level of going to have motions in a uniform style. I don't want it to be rigid, but I don't want it to be just, anything goes. As we said, the debate must be confined to the question, motion before the body, and it's out of order to interrupt that speaker who has the floor, except for those very narrow circumstances we talked about before. Calling somebody, to order because they're violating the rules, or clarifying a parliamentary process, or having a personal privilege, or requesting a personal privilege. Those very narrow situations. Otherwise, you have to wait your turn. You can't interrupt a better speaker. Now, the body, the presiding officer, or both, can set reasonable time limits in debate. Robert's Rules of Order sets time limits as 10 minutes per person, and being able to speak twice on it. So for each motion, you may speak 10 minutes at a time, and you may speak twice on each motion. That's the time limits that Robert's Rules of Order sets. You can set time limits of your own if you wish. And I actually recommend you do so. If you're going to have public participation, particularly, you want to have time limits on how long the public not members who are not members of the board get to speak. If you're really progressive in this respect, you'll limit the time the board members can speak as well. But that's kind of unique, because boards don't like to limit themselves on how much they can debate. But even during the course of debating a motion, time can be extended or limited. I'll give you an example. We're talking about this motion to buy this tractor, and we've been debating this thing back and forth for 15 or 20 minutes. If I can get the floor, I can offer a motion, for example, to end debate in 10 minutes. That would be a way of that's a motion. That's one of those subsidiary motions. Helps to dispose of the main motion by what? By setting a reasonable time limit. If that motion gets seconded and voted on, then debate will stop in 10 minutes. But I can't make that motion unless and until I get the floor. So that's an example how you can extend time limits or limit time limits during the course of the meeting if you don't have standing rules. But I always think it's a really good idea to have standing rules of procedure. So more about debate and decorum. Most motions are subject to debate, debatable motions. Again, that's where this tinted section of Robert's Rules comes into play. It'll tell you at a glance which motions are debatable and which motions are not. There are a few motions that are non-debatable, but most motions are debatable. I'll give you an example of one that's non-debatable. It's probably a motion that you've heard of before. It's a motion to call the question. The motion to call the question is simply a motion to immediately end debate. If that motion is seconded, there's no need to debate. That would be a waste of time to debate whether we're going to end debate. See what I'm saying? It's kind of circular. So that would be an example of a motion that's not debatable. So most motions you're going to encounter are going to be debatable. This is so obvious it shouldn't bear repeating or talking about, but you'd be surprised and amazed at how much it comes up and how often. Members need to respect each other when they have the floor and when they're talking, and not interrupt, and not be disruptive, and not do things that draw attention to them rather than to whoever has the floor. I mean, the attention of the board and the attention of the participants, the public, should be focused on the person who's talking and giving the speech. Just as you would command respect of your colleagues, the members of the public, so do your colleagues command the same respect. And so this is just kind of almost a given, but it becomes an issue sometimes when issues become important and they become hot topic issues, so to speak. At some point in time, it's going to be obvious that the debate is winding down and we're done discussing the issue, and it's going to be time to vote on the issue. This is the next step, the sixth step, I believe, and that is where the chair puts the question to the board. Now, this means that the chair or the clerk or the parliamentarian or all three have to have been paying attention to what's going on, because when they put the question to the board, putting the question means that they're going to put the motion to a vote as it has been amended over the course of the debate. So there may be several amendments, some that have failed, some that have passed. And so the chair and the parliamentarian and the clerk need to keep track of that, keep a score sheet, so to speak, to make sure that the motion that gets put before the body for a vote is the motion that is intended to be there. It's a product of that debate. It's a product of that debate minus amendments that failed and plus amendments that adhere to or passed. And as we'll see, you can make many amendments to a bill, to a motion, as time goes on, as that debate goes on. And so you really do have to keep a score sheet to decide to make sure that you put the right question before the board to vote, because that's the question that they're going to vote on. That's the question that's going to go into the minutes, and that's the question that's going to define how the board processed that particular motion or that particular request. So this is an exceedingly important piece of this pie, putting the question to the body for a vote. After that gets done, the members vote on the issue. And this is one of my pet peeves as well, is that all members should vote for or against a measure. It should say aye or nay, unless there's some conflict of interest for which they should abstain. And in that case, quite frankly, if there's a conflict of interest such that you don't want to vote or such that you don't feel comfortable voting, you shouldn't be in the room during debate at all. We'll get to that in a minute. So clearly there are exceptions to voting. You shouldn't vote if you have a conflict. You shouldn't participate at all if you have a conflict. But if you are there, you're part of, you were elected to or appointed to these positions to represent the people. And so your obligation, your responsibility, professional obligation as a board member is to vote on those members. Now, I don't know if any of you have been up to the legislature if you have, you may have witnessed this ridiculous procedure that they have where members can explain their vote. I mean, I think it's the most ridiculous procedure there is because their vote has already been explained by virtue of what they said in debate. They don't need to explain it again. So taking a vote and then after the fact explaining your vote is just redundant. It's repetitious. It's a waste of time. It's unnecessary. So if I were writing rules, I would put in a specific rule against explaining one's vote. Once a vote is taken, I didn't put a slide in here, but then the final step is for the clerk or the chair to announce the results of the vote. The ayes have it, the motion is adopted, we're buying the track, or the noes have it, the motion fails, the motion is not adopted, we're not buying a tractor, next item of business. So that there's finality to that motion. Or it could be that the motion to postpone till the next meeting is adopted, the ayes have it, this motion is postponed to the next meeting, next item of business. You've disposed of that motion. You're free now to move on to the next agenda item, the next month. Okay, so we said in this slide here that it's important in my mind, part of a representative government, that people who are elected or appointed as representatives should cast votes. That's what they're there for. They're not there just to debate and spout off what they feel about. They're there to cast votes. Matter of fact, a member of a board such as yours, a member of the city council, a member of the state legislature, they speak not by what they debate, not by what they say in debate, but they speak by their vote. That's the language of elected democracy, is the vote. And so it's important in my mind to vote on those issues so that your vote is recorded, so that your precise legal feelings on a matter are recorded. But there may be times when you can't. There may be times when you can't vote or when you shouldn't vote. So on the one hand, I think you have a responsibility to take a stand to vote on the issues that are presented to you. You were put there on behalf of the people who appointed you or elected you or however you came to office. And so I think personally a local rule, you don't see it very often, but I think a local rule that requires elected officials to vote is in order. Now, obviously, that there may be some enforceability issues there. You can't order somebody to utter the words aye or nay, but a local rule saying it's your responsibility, and it goes a long way to getting people to do that. But what if you can't? What if you shouldn't? What does it mean to abstain? Okay. An abstention is basically if you're part of the body and if you're there and listen to the debate and now you're there prepared to take a vote, but now you're going to say, I can't take a vote. I see a couple of problems here. First of all, I think if it's important enough for you to say, I have a conflict of interest and I can't vote, I think it's important enough for you to leave the room while the proceedings are taking place. You certainly shouldn't be debating for or against because you have a conflict of interest. You certainly shouldn't be sitting up on the dais, making faces, making eye contact, or otherwise being a presence for those factors or pursuing either something or are against something. So it seems to me that this notion of an abstention, of casting, a vote abstaining should never happen because you shouldn't be in the room in the first place. Ideally, that's That's the way I think it should happen. But oftentimes it doesn't happen that way. We don't do the right thing and exit the room while this item is going on. We still participate. We're still there when it comes time to the vote. And then out of our mouth comes the word, I abstain. So what does that mean? It means it's a nullity. It means nothing. It's not a yes vote. It certainly didn't say yes. And it's not a no vote because they certainly didn't say no. It's a nothing. It's counted as nothing. It's counted as zero. Now, a lot of people attribute a yes, an abstention to mean a yes vote, or count it as a no vote. And I think that's improper because that member did not vote. That member chose not to vote. So in other words, you can't use a no vote as ground for creating a tie to allow the presiding officer to vote in those circumstances where the presiding officer can't vote unless there's a tie. Or you can't use that silence to be attributed as a yes vote to carry the day. The local rules that process abstentions in any other way but a nullity, I think, are misusing and misstating the purpose for that nullity, the purpose for that abstention, which is that you had a conflict of interest and you should not be casting a vote one way or the other. I think, I think that's very important to recognize the difference, to recognize the true effect of an abstention. So I want to show you a little table here. This is going to give you a little idea, a little help on the types of motions. There's a whole bunch of motions, obviously. I want to talk about. We talked about some of these kind of in a large overview, but I wanted to give you a view to kind of see how they all fit in. This green box here, this is that main motion. That's what we were talking about. The main substantive. This introduces a question to the parties, to the board for discussion. Now, a lot of things can be done to this motion to get it in a position to vote. Those, some of those, we call them secondary motions. I didn't really put them out here, but I think it's in a couple of slides. But there's motions that help advance this along. So like a motion to amend this would help this along. A motion to refer it to a committee helps dispose of the motion. A motion to postpone to a time certain moves this along, helps to decide or to do something with the main motion. All of those I put under the same main motion. We talked about privilege motions, motions to adjourn, motions to a recess, questions of privilege, and a call for the orders of the day are all privileged motions. They can be made, at any time, and they have very high ranking. So, for example, let's just say a meeting is getting very contentious, very early in the evening. A person gets the floor and makes a motion to adjourn. Because that's a privileged motion, it doesn't matter whether you have 100 agenda items after that. If that motion passes, you're adjourned. So it's a very important ranking privileged motions. These subsidiary motions down here are motions that don't necessarily relate to the substance of the main motion, but to how the motion is going to be treated. We'll talk about some of these tabling motions, opening, closing debate, limiting debate, postponing, referring to a committee, amending. These all deal with how we're going to dispose of the motion. Incidental motions. There are several incidental, and you see how these subsidiary motions, they all attach directly to the motion. They all have some effect directly on the motion. We're going to table the motion. We're going to close debate on the motion. We're going to postpone this motion to a certain time. We're going to amend this motion. Well, they all relate directly to the motion, these so-called subsidiary motions. These incidental motions up here, they relate to the procedure in which we're going to deal with the motion. We may want to suspend the rules to allow more debate. We want to raise a point of order. We want to understand the parliamentary input. Or maybe even after a motion's been debated for a while, somebody wants to withdraw that motion. Well, you see that these all relate to the procedure. And then these final class we call the bring back motions. Those are the ones that basically bring a motion back from the dead. Once a motion has been disposed of, these motions can bring that dead motion back. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about these because they're rather complicated. But I do want to talk about a couple of motions, a couple of common motions that you probably see all the time. And what do you think, Vanessa? If we leave about 15 minutes for questions, is that what it's looking? Do you think we have a lot of questions?
Yes, that's fine. I have this scheduled until 1:30. We can go on as long as we'd like, as long as you have time and our participants want to be part of this.
Okay. I just didn't want to take up too much of their time. And I've got a lot of slides that I can quit at any time. I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Yeah, I definitely think we have time for questions. So
Okay.
I want to invite I didn't want to interrupt you, Randall. Are you kind of at the end? Because I can start having the attendees ask their questions if they're ready.
Let me go through just a few of these common motions. Give me about 10 minutes, and then we'll do that. Okay, so we talked about this class of motions that are directed toward a motion that help dispose of the motion. These are, I've laid these out. I'm going to talk about them very quickly. This motion to postpone indefinitely, we're not going to talk about that. It's a very specific motion. It doesn't really apply to anything. But referring to a committee, postponing to a certain time, limiting debate, previous question, amending motion, laying on the table. All of these are motions that apply and are directed towards a main motion. So let's look at how they work out. The motion to amend. You can amend any motion. And if that amendment is seconded and approved, then that amendment is what we call adheres to the main motion, becomes part of the main motion. If an amendment fails, it falls to the floor and is no longer relevant. So you can see that you can amend a motion almost indefinitely, as long as the amendment is germane or relevant to the subject of the proposition. Okay, and so after an amendment is proposed and debated, it's put to a vote, and it's either approved or disapproved. Okay. Amendments, this is a formal way of making an amendment, but in informal boards such as yours, it seems to me that whatever word you use to offer an amendment should be accepted as a motion to amend and treated as such. But these are the typical formal ways to make an amendment. Now, I'm sure you've heard this term and this idea of a friendly amendment. It usually happens at the beginning where somebody has offered a motion and it's on the floor and it's stated by the chair, and then somebody on the same board offers what they call as a friendly amendment. And then usually what happens is the chair looks around, asks the maker of the motion if the amendment is friendly, and if the maker says yes, then they just adopt the amendment because it's friendly to the maker. Well, it bypasses the whole process. There may be somebody on that board who thinks it isn't friendly, and so allowing only the maker and the seconder to approve a so-called friendly amendment infringes on the rights of the entire board. So I would step away from this process. Short circuits the process. So in other words, my kind of mantra to this, or statement is all motions are contradictory. All motions are hostile, and treat them as such. So amendments, yeah, you can amend it as many times as you want to, as long as you want to, so long as it's germane to the motion. This is an easy one, and you probably don't have committees. You may have committees, but if the full board's not prepared to deal with an issue, they can refer to a committee. And that would dispose of the motion, right? If the motion is no longer in their court, no longer on their table, we've referred it to a committee. We're done with it. We've done our job disposing of the motion. Postponing to a time certain also does the same thing. The board says, we're not ready to discuss this today. We don't have enough information. The people who are supposed to be discussing this with us are not here. We can postpone this to the next meeting, or we can postpone it for an hour, or we can postpone it to whatever time certain the maker of the motion makes. But it's another way of getting that motion off of the board's table and disposing of the motion, whether it be till the next meeting or whether it be for an hour. The time certain is what the key is here. Move the previous question. I want to talk about this just for a couple minutes because it's something that's confused and it's misused. You probably heard this in meetings. In small boards like this, the usage should be very, very limited, if at all. But what it is a statement. It usually comes out as a statement or a demand to call the question. You've probably heard somebody say, I call the question, in those terms. And it comes out as a demand. But what it is, it's nothing more than a motion to immediately end debate. So this motion has to be decided on by a majority of the board. One member who calls the question cannot effectively end debate. Now, that motion may motivate unanimous consent to ending debate. Okay, that may be the first question that the chair says is there any objection on this board to calling the question? Seeing none, the question is called. Let's vote on it. But if somebody objects to calling the question, then you have to get a second to that motion, and you have to take a vote on it to determine whether or not it's the will of the board to immediately close debate. This is an important thing because people have the right to debate. So if there's not unanimous consent, there must be a second, and typically it must be voted on by a 2/3 majority to pass this motion, because it treads on the rights of people to engage in debate. If the motion passes by a 2/3 majority, debate is cut off and a vote immediately taken on the motion in whatever form it was at the time the question was called. If the vote fails, back on debate. Don't make the mistake of allowing a single person to call the question. And don't make the mistake of allowing members of the public to call the question. Only members of the board have rights to make motions such as the following. Lay on the table is another commonly misused motion. It's kind of it's a temporary setting of the side of motion. Misused because the nomenclature is used incorrectly. And the purpose of this motion basically is to interrupt the proceeding, to slide this pending motion to the side of the table temporarily because something more important has come up, with the idea that we're going to take it from the table and bring it back to the board at that meeting to discuss it. This is often confused with the motion to postpone we just talked about. Now, if you're going to postpone a matter anywhere beyond the end of this meeting, it should be a motion to postpone. If you're going to deal with it with the intent of bringing it back during the same meeting, you should make a motion to table. Parliamentary precision, if you will. So, you know, this often comes in handy if the people making, you know, who are going to make a presentation aren't there when the agenda item comes up. You can lay it on the table till they get there. You just say, we lay it on the table. So it's over on the table. When they show up, you can take it from the table and start talking. Let's say you're in the middle of a discussion and, you know, the senator comes. You know, you don't want to make the senator wait. So you table whatever's on your agenda, whatever's on in front of the board. You listen to the senator for 10 minutes. Senator leaves. You take it from the table. Okay. Couple more motions. I'm going to talk about incidental motions, just a couple, because they relate to the method of action rather than to the question. Probably the most common is this point of order. It's the right of every member who notices a breach of the rules to insist upon their enforcement. You have a right to have the rules enforced against and by everyone. And the way you make known that a rule is being violated is rising to a point of order, or just point of order, Mr. or Madam Chair. You know, that, and you can do this, and you can interrupt the speaker if the breach of protocol is significant enough. At that point in time, the chair should immediately stop the proceeding and make a ruling on the validity of the point. Your point is well taken, or your point is not well taken. You know? And then move on. If the chair is unsure, then of course the chair can submit it, the answer to that point of order to the board for a vote. But normally most chairs will stand up and make a ruling on that point of order. So this is what I was talking about, using it as a weapon, using it as a stall tactic. You know, it's not desirable to raise a point of order on minor irregularities, you know, technical matters. You know, it's, you know, use this sparingly. This is a tool that's very important. It can stop the proceedings in its tracks if it's something significant enough to discuss. So at this point in time, you know, we've got some more technical, esoteric things that we can use for parliamentary procedure 102. At that point in time, I thought I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions that we can ask or answer.
Yes, actually, we do have a two-part question from Mary, one of our participants. Her microphone is not working, so she asked me to read them. Her first question is regarding abstention. Number one, is it acceptable to abstain from a vote following debate if the member believes they do not have sufficient information to support a yes or no vote?
My answer would be no. The reason is, you know, I use, and I view abstention as a reason to avoid a vote because you have a conflict of interest. If you don't have sufficient information, you should tell the board that I don't have sufficient information. We need to postpone this meeting till I can get this information. We need to refer this to a committee that can get the information for me. But just to abstain because you don't think you have enough information, I think is kind of doing. It's kind of. I call it taking a powder. You're just taking a powder on your responsibility. You know? If there's information you need, tell them what you need, get the information, and then make an informed decision once you get that information.
Okay, great. And then the second part of that question is it acceptable to abstain from a vote if the information needed to make an informed vote was received too late for adequate consideration?
I guess my answer would be it's never too late for adequate consideration. And I'm not being a smart aleck. If it's too late for consideration based upon your rules of, when things have to get to the board, then that's exactly when it's appropriate to postpone that matter to the next meeting. You postpone that matter to the next meeting. You take that information that came in late, and you make sure it's part of the packet for the next meeting. That way, the entire board has all the information and is in a position to make a well thought out decision on this. I mean, I think that's the way I would handle it.
Okay, thanks for that. And then there's another question from another participant, Debbie Conger. Debbie, she typed, but what if you can't get the information, such as approving minutes from a meeting where you were not at? Debbie, I'm assuming that was in reference to the first part of that first question? Yes.
Well, and I think, that's, you should always have available minutes. I mean, yeah, there's nothing that's so important in my mind that you can't postpone this meeting. Minutes are public information. They should have been kept. I mean, if they're non-existent, they're non-existent, and you can't get non-existent. If they've lost or burned or flooded or whatever, you can't get them. But if they're accessible, you should, you don't have them, and you think that you do need them, then I think it's absolutely in order to postpone that meeting until you get that information. And you can postpone it for a short period of time. You could table it until you get the information, or if there are restrictions about introduction or putting things in a packet, then you'd be forced to put it on for the next agenda. But I think under those circumstances, those are things that are readily available. You should be able to get them. And I'm missing the point. So what is the point? I guess maybe I don't understand your question.
Debbie, do you want to be let in and ask the question directly? Would that be a little easier for you? I'd be happy to let you into the.
That's fine. I mean, because the fact that you weren't at a meeting doesn't necessarily preclude you from. Okay, just go ahead. Tell me
Sure.
what your question is.
Hold on, let me go ahead and let her in. It's probably easier if she can ask directly. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hi, Debbie. Go ahead. You probably want to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes. We can hear you.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, let's just say there was a meeting 2 months ago and you're being asked to approve the minutes, but the minutes are really detailed and you don't really know if the minutes are right because you weren't there. So how can you, I mean, what is it that I would be approving then? So I have abstained from minutes in that case, abstained from approving on the minutes, but I guess maybe I don't understand the point of.
No, I guess under those circumstances, that might be that's probably an exception to my requirement that you have a conflict of interest. I can understand how you would feel uncomfortable voting on minutes where you weren't at the meeting.
Okay, that's all. That was my question. So thanks.
On the other hand, it's not required. I mean, you can still vote on minutes where you weren't there if you trust the minute taker and you confer with the minute taker and you're satisfied with what's in the minutes, you can still vote to approve them. So
yeah, and I guess if the minutes were short, that would be fine, but sometimes they're so detailed that I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable. Sometimes minutes I think have too much detail that wasn't a discussion, and that's what I don't feel comfortable in, so that's why I've abstained. And so, okay, thank you. You answered my question.
No, I got you. And I think that would be appropriate under those circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Vanessa, for letting me in.
Yeah, no problem. Did any of our other attendees want to ask a question while we have Mr. Van Vleck available? Okay, I guess not. Randall, if you didn't have anything else to add to your presentation, I wanted to thank you very much for being part of this today. Very, very helpful. I learned a lot. I think our panelists probably did as well. This was very valuable. And I definitely think if there's interest in having another parliamentarian training, I would ask our neighborhood folks to please let me know. I'm happy to schedule that.
Great.
If anybody has any interest in getting a copy of Mr. Van Vleck's presentation, like I said in the chat earlier, feel free to email me and I'll make sure you get a copy of that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Vanessa. And
thank you, everybody. I appreciate
if
it.
there's interest in doing this again, we'll be happy to do it.
I definitely think we will. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time. I know we went a little longer than we normally do, but definitely I will get everybody a copy of the presentation. Thank you all very much for taking the time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great.
Thank you, Randall. Bye-bye.
Bye, Vanessa.